afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Philosophossum. So apparently Sam Seder has a challenge for us libertarians. He's come up with something that he thinks that we just can't deal with, and that would be climate change. So how would libertarians deal with climate change and other similar environmental issues? Stay tuned to find out. So I'm going to quickly preface this video by saying that I actually did edit out the first 2 minutes of the video so that I could get right into the meat and potatoes of the discussion. Yeah, one thing I've noticed about Sam Seder is that he tends to be a bit of a chatterbox. Like, he usually begins each of his videos by rambling on about a bunch of random stuff before actually getting into the main topic of the video. Yeah, him and Tom Hartman both seem to do this. I mean, as much as I criticize David Pakman and Kyle Kulinski, at least they actually get right into the discussion when they make their videos,
I imagine their perspective would be, there should be no public land.
Well, it depends on what you mean by public. If by public you mean the government owns it and it's just available for everyone to use, then yeah, sure, that's fine. But if by public you mean the government will steal from you in order to maintain it, then I have a problem with that.
All of that land should be owned by gas and oil companies.
Not necessarily. I mean, so long as they have permission from whoever owns the property, they can still drill for gas and oil there. And a lot of national parks do allow private companies to extract resources there. As long as they're getting permission first and they're doing it, environmentally responsible, I don't see what the problem is. It puts resources to good use and it makes some extra revenue for the park.
And they will protect it. On the theory that... what is the theory that you're protecting? Well, they're going to destroy it forever in terms of its...
They want to protect their investment.
Yeah,
so
but
who better to protect your investment for the long
But
term?
these guys
aren't the ones who have
their investment is subterranean.
Well, you guys are right. I agree.
Their investment is subterranean.
He is correct about this. Now granted, he does a shitty job of explaining it, but he is correct that it would basically come down to protecting their investment. You see, when the oil or gas company bought the land, set up the drills and well equipment to extract these resources, they put a lot of money into that. That was their investment. If something goes wrong, say an explosion happens and that destroys all their equipment, or some kind of leak happens and the surrounding property is damaged and they have to pay a bunch of lawsuits, that impacts the return on their investment. They may end up losing money.
Absolutely. I'm just saying what they might say.
Well, you're not doing a very good job in defending them.
For once Sam Seder actually says something I agree with. So as it turns out, Sam Seder can actually recognize when opposing viewpoints are being misrepresented. That's definitely not something I would have expected.
If you're a libertarian, explain to me how a fracking company, how they're going to be good stewards of the land.
Well, the fracking company would A, be liable for any environmental damage they cause to the surrounding property, and B, any such risk or liability would directly affect their profit. So this is essentially what would create the incentive for the fracking company to be a good environmental steward. Now Sam, let me ask you something. You seem to trust the government to be good stewards of the land more than you do the private sector. What makes you think the government would be any better steward of the land? Because unlike the private company, they can't really be held responsible if they damage the surrounding property, and they don't directly accept any risk. They just take the money that they need. They don't have to worry about profit. So if anything, the government would probably have less reason to care about the environment than the private company.
Don't you think, though, ultimately, in a lot of libertarian...
Mountaintop removal. How is that
libertarian argument?
Well, the oil and gas industry has actually led to a large decrease in mountaintop removal because, unlike coal, accessing oil and gas doesn't require digging up large amounts of land. You just drill a pipe and extract the resource from the ground. Now, if we ban or restrict access to oil and gas, then a lot of power companies might turn toward using more coal to get that electricity, which would result in much, much more mountaintop removal.
Arguments usually come down to, essentially, if you go through this line of questioning, it always goes down to global warming's a hoax.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
Actually, it comes down to property rights. You see, it does in fact violate the non-aggression principle to pollute or damage other people's property. So because of this, people would actually be held responsible for any environmental damage that they cause. You see, libertarians do have extensive views about how environmental issues would be dealt with under a free market, but instead of having an honest conversation about that, they just want to strawman us as a bunch of climate change deniers.
Fundamentally, you cannot accept the science of environmental issues and be a libertarian.
Why not? Libertarianism is simply the belief that aggression is wrong and that people should be free to do as they please so long as they're not hurting anybody. What about that makes it inconsistent with the science of environmental issues? Since we're concerned about whether or not our actions hurt other people, wouldn't that make us more concerned about environmental issues?
That's what I would say.
You don't necessarily have to believe in global warming, though, to see that what these fracking companies are doing are just bad.
No.
Fracking really isn't actually that bad for the environment as people seem to think. I mean, yes, there have been very isolated, singular instances of mistakes happening of some of the chemicals leaking into the groundwater, but those are just fringe, isolated incidents. It's not like a regular thing. As with anything else, you'd have to take proper precautions, make sure you're doing it properly and that you're doing it, consciously, being aware of your surroundings. But if done properly and safely, fracking can actually be a very environmentally friendly way to obtain vast quantities of oil. And these people who fearmonger about it and try to get it banned for no reason, they actually cause a lot of harm. Because I'm from the state of Maryland, and I remember back when fracking was banned here in Maryland, just the sheer amounts of economic devastation it caused. Like entire cities out in western Maryland that relied on fracking, became ghost towns overnight. It was ridiculous. Like you had big cities like Frederick and Hagerstown that were like these sprawling metropolises that are now shrinking, basically villages now. All because they had their major source of revenue and industry cut off by people who didn't get all the facts.
No, I'm saying you
yes.
cannot make the argument that a libertarian would make if you take any type of any type of environmental science seriously, fundamentally. It doesn't work.
Are you going to explain why that is? Because I'm a libertarian and I take environmentalism seriously. As a matter of fact, chances are I probably take it more seriously than you do, because I actually take the time and effort to research to get all the facts to know how exactly it is that A, the free market has contributed to a better environment, and B, things that the government has done to damage the environment. See, this is a fundamental problem with this video, is that they multiple times make the claim that there's no possible way to be a libertarian and take environmentalism seriously, but they never explain why. They never provide an explanation about how those two concepts are mutually exclusive. They just claim that it is.
Well, the dilemma there, and this would be a good question for libertarians. Here's a good question for libertarians. If you want to call in, you want to talk about libertarianism to me, global warming. Is there a libertarian who believes that there is a very high likelihood that global warming is real and that it is man-made, or man contributes enough to global warming that man could slow and mitigate its effects?
Well, one thing I can tell you for certain is that we probably know more accurately about these things if we lived in a predominantly libertarian society. You see, one of the biggest problems with our current understanding of environmental science and climate change and things like that is that these issues have become just so dang political that a neutral, purely scientific approach to the issue is virtually impossible. On the one hand, you have companies who want to pollute as much as possible without any consequences, and on the other hand, you have companies that would benefit from climate alarmism, such as solar panel and electric car manufacturers, and are both in this tug of war to see who can spin the data toward the conclusion that they want more. And the result of this is that completely unbiased, raw, just scientific data about the facts at hand is very difficult to come by. Now, in a libertarian society, things like special interest groups, lobbyists, grants, and subsidies would either not exist or exist to a far lesser extent than they do under our current big government paradigm. And as a result of this, any information about climate change, either for or against it existing, would have to compete openly and fairly in the marketplace of ideas. So because in a libertarian society things are just inherently less politicized and ideas don't get any special treatment because they're in line with what a special interest group wants, you're more likely to have objective scientific facts about environmental science.
I don't see how it is possible for them to believe in that and then maintain their belief that government should not infringe upon the property rights or the economic property rights, the economic rights of of those things that contribute to it.
So first of all, Sam here doesn't seem to understand property rights, which honestly doesn't come as a surprise to me. I mean, this guy has almost 200 videos where he debates libertarians, and yet he still doesn't seem to understand even the basics of it. I mean, if you debate against an ideology that frequently, even if you don't agree with that ideology, if you debate against it that frequently, you should at least have a basic understanding of it at that point, you'd think. But as I've explained previously, it does in fact violate people's property rights to pollute. So in this case, the government or other organizations stepping in and putting restrictions on things that contribute to pollution wouldn't actually be a violation of property rights, but rather enforcement of it. But the second thing to notice here is that he immediately draws the conclusion that it should be government that steps in and does something about it. Well, why the government specifically? Were they given special supernatural powers by God himself? You know, at the end of the day, they're just the same plain Jane Homo sapiens as you and me. They don't have any special powers or benevolence that we don't have. It's not like protecting the environment is something that exclusively the government can or even does do. I mean, just look at all the different environmental nonprofits and activist groups out there. Hell, I used to volunteer for one. I actually did things like go out in a canoe on the weekends and take water samples, or scoop trash out of the river, or, you know, walking through trails in the woods picking up trash, or, you know, doing different public events to try and educate people about climate change and different environmental issues. I mean, there are ways to accomplish these things that don't involve government, plenty of them.
So if you're a libertarian, call into the program, 646-257-3920. 646-257-3920. I will be upfront in telling you right now that I think libertarianism is a bit of a joke.
Yeah, because that's a good way to get people who hold the opposing viewpoint to engage with you. Act like a total condescending douche.
But, to be fair, I think it's a really dangerous one. So I will credit you with that.
Will you also credit us with an explanation as to how it's dangerous? Because I don't see any potential situation in which an ideology which says people should be left alone and not hurt each other could possibly be dangerous.
But happy to have the debate and give you the opportunity to convince our listeners and our viewers of the validity of libertarianism.
Yeah, if Sam Seder is interested in an honest conversation about libertarianism, then I have a pet dragon. This has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.